So welcome to Belfast, Wales. My name is Jonathan Watson, and today's guest is Steve Burgess. Steve is one of the world's leading hypnotherapists and past life regression specialists. He has completed thousands of past life regression sessions. Most of his work involves using hypnosis to regress people back to emotional root causes of their problems, often back into previous lifetimes. Steve also has a YouTube channel, Hypno for All, which features free hypnotherapy recordings. He is also in demand as hypnotherapy trainer. His work has been featured on TV, local and national radio, and in many publications. His book, The Power of Past Life Regression, is out now. It's available on Amazon, Waterstones, and all other good bookshops. So, Steve, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Just to get 12 rolling and such. How did you get in hypnotherapy? How did that come about?
It was a bit of an accident. I've been a hypnotherapist now for 29 years, and I'd been a director of a publishing company for some time, which went bust all of a sudden, and I had to sort of change career direction pretty quickly. I wasn't sure what to do. And my father had been playing with hypnotherapy for a short time, because what had happened is he wanted to stop smoking, and he tried everything to stop smoking, and nothing had worked over many years. And then finally he went to see a hypnotherapist, and this hypnotherapist laid him in a comfortable chair and relaxed him down and gave him suggestions about letting go of cigarette smoking. And my dad didn't want any cigarettes anymore. He didn't want to smoke. And he couldn't understand this, because my dad's a left-brain scientist, and it just didn't make sense to him. How did this work? He laid in a chair and somebody talked to him, and he didn't want cigarettes anymore. And so he started to read up about hypnosis, and the more he read, the more fascinated he became, until eventually he trained as a hypnotherapist and then just started working privately from home as a hobby, just treating people as a hobby. So when he said, "Why do you look at being a hypnotherapist?" I thought, okay, let's give it a try. So I went off and got trained, and found actually that I was lucky. I'm what's called a natural therapist, and it was like a bit like coming home to something. Like some people are natural footballers, natural sports people, natural musicians, natural plumbers, natural drivers, and I'm just a natural therapist. So it was just like coming home. And so 29 years later, here I am, 15,000 therapy sessions later, and I'm still got the same love for the job that I've had all of these years.
Excellent, because I've had experience of hypnotherapy, and for myself, I'm currently trying to learn to swim, so people might laugh at that, but I have a real fear of the water.
Okay.
I can actually, it's maybe make us more confusing, I can actually swim, but it's a mental block in the head that kind of just stops you from kind of trusting myself to float in the water.
Okay.
And just when I'm watching, I had a hypnotherapy session, and when I went in the pool, it was I could feel, the only way I could describe it is like being in a building and your fear was locked outside looking in the window at you, and almost kind of like saying, like, let me in, like let me come in and do what I normally do. And it was weird. It's a hard thing to explain, but if you could just explain, like, what is hypnotherapy, like, what in a layman's terms, how does it
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, and we can probably talk about phobias as well at some stage, because obviously we'll treat phobias regularly. Well, hypnosis is a completely natural state. Unfortunately, what happens is people tend to see stage hypnotists pervert hypnosis and humiliating people, or they see things in Hollywood movies which are absolute nonsense, and they get the wrong impression. So let me tell you what hypnosis isn't. It isn't falling asleep. It isn't being in sleep. It isn't being in a coma where you don't know what on earth's happening. It isn't being under anesthetic. It isn't being under the control of the hypnotist. These are all the myths. Basically, what hypnosis is a focus state, generally in which we're relaxing. So when we change our focus from being consciously aware of something and we slip into something else, we daydream, for example, that's a trance state. Anybody who goes on automatic pilot in the car, when you're driving along and you suddenly think, how did I get here? That's trance. That's our word. Trance is the word we use for hypnotic state. When we're drifting into sleep, when we're drifting out of sleep, that's hypnosis. So we all go into hypnosis about 24 times a day, quite naturally, without realizing. So what us hypnotherapists aim to do is get over the naturalness of this. It's something weird. We're not doing the swinging watch chain stuff. We're not doing the Svengali stuff. Basically, hypnotherapy is, in most cases, for most hypnotherapy sessions, a state of relaxation. So as a general rule, when somebody is in a trance, they're a bit more relaxed than usual. Sometimes it can be very deeply relaxed and the mind becomes more focused. Now, what that focused attention does, it allows the subconscious mind, the deep inner part of the mind, to sort of come to the fore. I often say, look, the mind is very much like an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg above the waves is the conscious thinking mind. So as people are listening to me now and they're analyzing what I'm saying, they're doing this consciously with the tip of the mind. But beneath the surface of the waves is the 99.9% of the mind, which is called the subconscious. It's the engine room of the mind, the powerhouse of the mind, which is one reason why hypnotherapy is so flipping powerful, because we're using the engine room of the mind to help people. And the subconscious mind is the seat of our emotions. It's the seat of our creativity. It's the seat of our intuition. It's the seat of our imagination. It contains all of our memories. So what happens is when a person goes into hypnosis, into trance, is they start to move gently into the subconscious, and they're more able then to access and activate the powerhouse of the mind and use that in order to help themselves. So in a hypnotherapy setting, we're using the subconscious mind to help people with a massive range of issues. I mean, it's just extraordinarily wide. Most people know about hypnosis being good for stopping smoking and weight loss. But, we can use hypnotherapy and regression, especially for depression, for anxieties, for phobias, for lack of confidence, for relationship issues, for sexual issues, for addictions, for physical problems, for et cetera, you name it. We can use hypnotherapy for it. And the standard use of hypnotherapy, which most people would experience if they go for hypnotherapy, is, as you possibly did for your sessions, the client relaxes down and the suggestions, the hypnotherapist gives hypnotic suggestions about changing. So, if somebody wants to stop smoking, then the suggestions are about letting go of cigarettes and becoming smoke-free and becoming healthier. And the idea behind that is that these suggestions then settle into the subconscious mind and are activated at a very deep level in the mind. And those new suggestions can often shut out. And your analogy there of these old fears were outside the room, they were still there, but they weren't there, is a great analogy. The old ways of being tend to drift off and these new ways of being come in. And so that's standard hypnotherapy, what we call post-hypnotic suggestion therapy. I tend to work a lot deeper than that, though. Regression is the work I do mainly in hypnosis. And if I may move on to that, just as an explanation, give you a picture.
How did, for two questions, how did you get involved with regression hypnosis, and what is that as well? Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. No, sorry. I'll answer the second question first. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Regression is basically just means to go back into the past in our thoughts. So we regress all the time naturally. If I ask you to, think about what you had for dinner last night, your mind would go back to last night, and you'd remember having whatever it was. You've just regressed. If I ask you to remember your 18th birthday, you'll go back in time in your mind. You remember the birthday, you've regressed. So regression is a natural process. In a therapeutic setting, however, what it usually means is to go back into the causes, the emotional and energetic causes of a problem, of an issue, whatever the issue is. Like I've said, depression, phobias, anxieties, etc. And so when we regress clients back in trance, they often go back and relive the traumas, because it's usually traumas in the past that are causing problems. So, and there are three areas that I regress to. The first is the most obvious, and that's this present lifetime. Most of us got emotional baggage from this life. So I do a lot of work releasing trauma and pain from this lifetime, especially childhood trauma. I work a lot with past lifetimes, and also I go back into ancestral traumas, because we also inherit traumas from our ancestors in our bloodline, parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, etc. So those are the three areas that we regress back into. Now, how I got started with this was after maybe 6 months of being a normal therapist, a standard hypnotherapist, just using hypnotic suggestions with people. I wasn't trained in regression. I knew about it, but I wasn't trained in it. And then what happened is one day a young man came to me with a severe anxiety state. Now, he was in his mid-20s. And as he sat in front of me in my office, he was in pieces. He was shaking. He was hyperventilating. He was stammering his words out and stuttering. His breathing was rapid. He was in a really bad state. He had a very severe anxiety state. So I said, so how long have you had this for? And he said, well, I've always been a worrier. And like I said, he was I was always a worrier. All my life, I was worried about things. He was like this. He was so tense. But he said, it's got worse and worse as I became an adult. And then over the last few years, since the children came along, it's just got to this stage now where I can't do anything. I hardly sleep. I can't work. I've had to give my job up. I sit at home all day just shaking. I have no life. My wife is completely sick and tired of it. She's saying that she'll divorce me if I don't get better. Okay. So no pressure there. Yeah. So he was in a really bad state. So I said, okay, well, let's do some trance work. And I guided him into hypnosis, into a trance, and he started to relax, and he relaxed beautifully. His whole body softened, his breathing slowed down. And I was thinking, great, this is really working. I'm going to do some post-hypnotic suggestions here to get him to imagine the anxiety has dissolved away. And then all of a sudden, after 10 minutes, his whole body started to shake. So he went from being totally relaxed and prone to his whole body shaking in the chair. And the next thing, he started to shout and speak and stammer, and he was half whispering and half shouting. And he's saying something like, no, they're coming, hide the children, hide them, hide, be quiet, in here, quiet, they're coming, quiet. And then suddenly he started to scream and yell and writhe, and he was screaming, no, not the children, no, ah! And he just flopped down in the chair. Yeah. It was completely still. So I was shocked. I wasn't expecting this. So I said, are you okay? And he said, I feel wonderful. I feel absolutely wonderful. He laid there with his eyes closed. He said, I have never felt this calm in my life. I feel completely relaxed. I thought, well, I don't. I said, well, what was happening there? He said it was weird. It was like I was in another body in another time. Yeah. I was a man, and we were hiding, my family, we were trying to hide from soldiers. I think they were Nazi soldiers. And we were hiding, and then they found us, and they came in and they shot us and they killed us all. He said, what? He said, what was that? So I said, well, I think you've been in a past lifetime. Obviously, I knew about past lives and reincarnation. But how do you feel? He said, I feel absolutely wonderful. And Jonathan, his problem was completely fixed in 10, 15 minutes. And I I thought, why don't I know about this? He'd spontaneously regressed, which occasionally happens, not very often, but it happened because his subconscious needed to release all of that trauma. And so I then got hold of some information from an American association, a Past Life Association, started to work with it, open it up a little bit more. And then I've developed over the last 29 years a system of working in regression, a very structured regression system, which is almost scientific in the way that I use it.
Yeah.
And that I train therapists around the world in now, as being a very powerful therapy process. So it all really came from that young man, and that revolutionized my work. And to such a degree now that, past lives, I'm working in past lives most days of every week online with clients.
What when people come to yourself, like in the case of that individual, is it normally these people are kind of exhausted, like maybe they went to the doctor and they're saying like I'm feeling depressed, I can't get out of bed, can't do my job, and I know myself that again, not knocking doctors, but I think a lot of our doctors now are incredibly overwhelmed. So it's kind of like, here's a prescription for citalopram or whatever antidepressant. Are these people kind of they're at the end of their tether with maybe taking medication, maybe they've went and seen a counsellor, but nothing kind of gets fit? Is it kind of like
Can be.
last chance saloon as such?
It can be. I mean, sometimes people are intelligent enough to realize that the doctor doesn't have all the answers and that medication is not the answer. And they come at an earlier stage. But there are certainly people who come and it's like we're a last resort, really. I mean, if I can give you an example of that, I had a lady who, and again, she's not actually featured in the new book, but just as a story of how this happens, she came to me over 20 years ago, and she had a liver disease of which there's only 12 people. This is very rare. 12 people in the UK have this liver disease at any one time.
Okay.
It's called focal nodular hyperplasia, which is very unusual. And it's a disease in which tumours grow on the liver. Now, the tumours are not cancerous, but they actually grow to the size of melons and grapefruits. And so she had a whole series of these tumours growing on her liver. They were so big that, of course, what happens is they compress all the internal organs. So she was in pain 24 hours a day. She felt sick and nauseous all the time. She couldn't eat. And she had to be helped up to I used to work from an office in those days, and she had to be helped up the stairs by two people into my office. She was a young 35-year-old woman, used to be very fit and healthy, and she looked like a stick insect. She just flopped in my chair, and she couldn't eat. She spent most of the day just laying on the bed in pain. She was doped up to the eyeballs on morphine, and she just sat in front of me and she said, I've been given 6 months to live. You're my last hope. Okay, no pressure there then.
Yeah.
So I talked to her about the emotional causes of illness, the energetic causes of illness, because in my world, all illness has emotional causes, all illness. And this is how I work with it in regression, to work on the emotional causes. And we started to do therapy work. Now, within a week after that first session, she was able to completely come off morphine. So we did work to release some of the pain. Obviously, hypnotherapy can be very good for pain management.
Yeah.
And then we started working in different ways on the emotional causes of this illness. There were two past lives in there. One of the past lives, she was a young Native American squaw, and she was killed in a raiding party on her village when some other Native American from another tribe burst in, grabbed her from behind and stabbed her in the back with a knife and killed her. And of course, the back, it went through where the liver is in this life. In the other past life, she was a young man, I think it was in the Second World War, maybe in Poland or somewhere, who again was killed by Nazis and was bayoneted in the back in the liver area.
Yeah.
So we release those past lives, the deaths in the past lives. And it is often deaths in past lives that we're working with when we do this therapy stuff. And over time, she started to get better. The tumors stopped growing. And that was quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what happened is that her surgeon thought that she'd got so much better than she used to be because of the work we were doing, that she was strong enough to have some surgery to work on the tumors. Now,
Excellent.
previously, she'd had the surgery twice before, and it had been a complete disaster both times. Basically, what the surgeon was trying to do was thread coils up to the tumors to cut off the blood supply by threading these things through the blood vessels. And she had to drink a dye down before the surgery so that the surgeon could see on screen what was happening. It was reflected what was going on in the body. And she was highly allergic to this stuff. She was so allergic to most things, they couldn't give her an anesthetic, that she spent the whole of the operation twice before vomiting and retching all the way through. And of course, there's a surgeon trying to do a delicate operation and the whole body's jumping all the time. The first time, they actually damaged the liver itself. And the second time, it damaged the gallbladder so much, she had to have a gallbladder removed. Both times after the operation, I think the operations took several hours, and she was in hospital for several weeks after the ops. And then she turned up at my office one morning and said, well, the surgeon thinks I'm strong enough. He wants to do the operation again and have another try. And then these words came out of my mouth, and I still don't know where these words came from, Jonathan, but I heard myself saying, we'll do the operation in hypnosis.
Oh.
And she said, wow, that's fantastic. And before I never thought, did I say that? Oh, heck. So anyway, so basically we did the operation without any anesthetic in hypnosis. I stayed with her all the way through the surgery. It was a massive success. She wasn't sick at all once. The operation took, I think it was about an hour and a half it took instead of several hours. She was out of hospital, I think 2 or 3 days later. So, you know, what I'm saying is these stories are about not just about the past lives, but about the healing power of hypnotherapy and the stuff that we can do using the mind. It's just quite immense.
No, definitely, because I think that's what I think we do. We all live busy lives, and I think people forget how powerful your mind is. We're all aware of the placebo effect, and that's been demonstrated on different things. And I've heard of people using hypnotherapy before for surgeries, which is kind of like mind-boggling when you think about it. But it is astounding, the power of the mind. Going with the past life, is there a danger of re-traumatization when someone regresses? Is there a danger that in the case of like the guy, imagine his he went back and he could see his family being shot. Is there a danger that triggers like a recurrence of trauma in a way?
There is always a small possibility that if a person goes back through trauma, that they can be re-traumatized. However, if the job's done properly, there is no danger whatsoever. So what can happen is if you take a person back into a trauma and you don't fully release the trauma, then often the energy of that will stay with them for a little while, and they will feel worse for a while. They won't feel worse long term, but for a while they will feel worse. So one of the features of regression work is that we have to go back through the trauma over and over, sometimes several times, to release it. Now, with my first client, as I explained with the big release, it was just released in one go. We didn't have to go back through the death experience more than once because he had such a big release, the screaming and the yelling. It completely let all of the energy out from the trauma. So as long as it's done correctly and safely, it's perfectly safe. And, you know, bear in mind, as I say, I've done around over 15,000 therapy sessions now. And, you know, if it didn't work and if it was dangerous, I wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. There was a thing the show was on Netflix, which I'm sure you're aware of, and if I am watching this, I'd recommend checking out. It's called Surviving Death. But there's a really interesting case of a young boy. His name was James Linenger, and he had these nightmares of basically being in a burning aircraft, an aircraft crashing, and his family were quite skeptical at first, but the dreams he had were, and what he was talking about, he was so sure of them. And the father said it was like singing The Exorcist every night. He's waking up in these terrors. And as it turned out, from what the boy could remember, they were able to find out that he actually, it was a pilot. His name, James, was James Huston, and he died in 1945. And it was the details that the boy was able to give that was allowed then to connect the two. And in the documentary, it shows them to take the boy to, I think it was near Iwo Jima. And once he's there and on the beach, that's it. You could see what you were talking about. There was like a kind of it was almost like a release, like job done. Let's get on with it.
Yeah.
What just for anyone watches, and I know most people probably heard of the term reincarnation. No, especially like I think I'm asking a stupid question here, but what is reincarnation?
Well, it appears that we live many lifetimes, and we live in the wrong half of the world. Over half the known world believes in reincarnation, the concept of rebirth. So it appears that a part of us, our soul, once we die and the physical body dies, our soul releases and moves. First of all, it moves into a spirit sort of realm to heal after the life it's just lived. And then at some stage, it will be reborn again in another body in another time. And the concept, the idea of reincarnation, it appears, is that over many, many lifetimes, we learn so many different things. We grow as souls until eventually we don't actually have to come back and get reborn. And we can get reborn in many different ways. So generally speaking, especially in therapy, we're seeing people who have had past lives as human beings time after time. But I've certainly had clients who have had past life as animals, and also as other life forms on other planets.
Okay.
So, we get reincarnated in different ways over many, many lives. So that's the concept of it. And, when you hear the stories like you've just said of that lad, and the parents, if I'm right, because I think they wrote a book about this, where they researched this pilot, they got all of this information, and they found that it was all true.
Yeah.
Well, there's no way on earth that young lad would have known that information. There's another wonderful story from an English hypnotherapist. I can't remember her name now, and she wrote in one of her books about a young boy who was brought to her. I think he was about 11 years old, for therapy. And his problem was that if anybody asked him a question, his neck muscles just completely solidified. They went tight and he couldn't speak. He just went, all these inarticulate sounds came out of his mouth. Now you can imagine, this was devastating at school. I mean, it wrecked his school life, and he was a butt of kids' jokes. He was bullied, and the teachers gave up on him, and they started to bully him a bit. And he tried everything, speech therapists and counsellors and all the usual malarkey. And eventually somebody sort of half jokingly said to his parents, "Why don't you get him to see a hypnotherapist?" Well, they were desperate, and they took him to see this lady hypnotherapist somewhere in England. And she regressed him back to the cause of the problem. And he then started to relive a past life in which he was an American Air Force pilot who was shot down on a mission over France in something like, just for example, let's say April 1941 or something, just as an example. He was shot down over France. He survived the crash, but then he was captured by the Nazis and shipped off to the Gestapo, who started to torture him. Now, at this stage in the regression, and bear in mind, there's two things here. All the time he was in trance and she's asking him questions, he was talking perfectly normally. Remember, he'd never been able to do that for the whole of his life. So she's saying, what's happening now? And he said, I'm driving the airplane. What's happening now? It's crashing. He could talk. But then what happened? He described being tortured by the Gestapo. And as he was experiencing the torture, all he said over and over was his name, his rank, and his serial number. Name, rank, serial number. Name. That's all he said as she was asking him questions until they killed him. They tortured him and killed him. Now, he came out of trance at the end of the session. I mean, he was pretty shocked, but his problem had gone. He was talking completely normally. His parents were asking him questions. The therapist was. He could talk normally. Well, that's a wonderful result, but his parents were fascinated. They took the information, got in touch with the American authorities, who wrote back and said that they had as listed as missing, presumed dead, a pilot of that name, rank, and serial number over in that date who had disappeared over Allied France in whatever date it was.
Yeah.
So when people, and there's always a lot of prejudice against this stuff, Jonathan, there always is. I mean, basically from people who have never looked at it in depth and researched it.
Yeah.
But when people say, well, that boy must have read that in a book somewhere or heard it on the TV and then remembered it and then brought it through in the hypnotherapy session. Come on. I mean, how is he going to know that? That's never going to come through unless it was a real past life. So now, okay, in regression therapy, I don't get too many clients who come up with verifiable information because my role as a therapist is to help them to get better. And what I'm normally doing is guiding them through past life traumas and experiences. And they're reliving those and letting go of the anxieties or the sadnesses or whatever, and they get better. So I don't go looking for verifiable information, but it occasionally comes through. And just as an example, and I think this is pretty verifiable, I had a client in the States a few weeks ago, and a lovely man who works in real estate, and he went back into a past life, which he was a carpenter living in 18th century or 17th century England. And he started to see, he says, I live in a little village. He said, I live in a little village in Berkshire, which of course is Berkshire, as we would say. Yeah. And then he said, I live in Upper Bucklebury in Berkshire. Oh, never heard of that. So, and then he went on and he said, I'm leaving to go to America. He said, I'm a Quaker, and it's the round about the 1650s. In fact, our king is Charles, and we're going to go to live in America, and we're going to be one of the first Quakers. And of course, Charles II was on the throne until I think 1685, and he it was who gave land to, I think it was William Penn, in the States to create Pennsylvania, which was a Quaker colony. So the idea Quakers went over from the UK to live a freer life because they were being persecuted. And so, first of all, he got Upper Bucklebury in Berkshire, mid-1600s. Yes, he got the right king. And bear in mind, he's living in America. He's not a historian. But then he said, as I'm leaving Upper Bucklebury and I'm walking to Bristol or going over to Bristol to get the ship, he said, I'm looking at the church here in the village. He said, it's an old sort of white stone church. And he said, oh, it's St. Mary's Church. So, okay, after the session, I went onto Wikipedia, and in Berkshire, there is a village called Upper Bucklebury. Now, I've lived and travelled around England all of my life. I ain't ever heard of Upper Bucklebury. Not even Bucklebury, but Upper Bucklebury. And guess what the name of the church is in Upper Bucklebury? St. Mary's. Yeah. So then he goes to Bristol, and the ship he gets to go over to Pennsylvania is a ship called the Bristol Merchant. So again, the next session, there I am on Wikipedia, and guess one of the ships that was going over to America regularly taking the Quakers was called the Bristol Merchant. How does a man living in the north of America who doesn't research these things, how does he know that if it isn't real? So, when these sort of cases come through like this, and in my first book, I wrote a book called Famous Past Lives, where I've had some people in Past Life Regression who have been very famous in their past lifetimes. And I'm always very skeptical whenever somebody claims to be famous, but these were good cases. And in one of the cases, this lady and one of the men, they came up with specific historical information, very detailed information, that I had to go to history books, and there it all was. It was all there. And these are people, again, who have never researched these periods of history and talking facts, which would never be, let's say, if you happen to see a documentary for an hour on the TV about this historical person, these specific facts would never be mentioned because these are too detailed. So when these sort of things come through, you start to think, there is something very, very real about reincarnation. It isn't just a myth. It isn't just something that either New Agers believe or weirdo Asians in Nepal or something. I think it's actually factually the case that we've lived many, many lives before. And I often say, look, if people could sit in it used to be in my office, but if people could sit observing my online sessions, because I do everything online now, day after day, and watching how people go into these experiences and bring them through without any knowledge or any belief in reincarnation in past lives. And then they get better, and they're not fed it by me. I don't feed them. I don't lead them. It happens, once they're in the past life, it happens spontaneously. And this happens time after time after time. I mean, thousands of sessions for me, thousands of other past life sessions around the world with regression therapists. If this was just imagination, it just wouldn't have such depth and such significance.
I think, again, that documentary I watched, Surviving Death, again, this is available on Netflix. I want to check it out. There was, again, along with that case of the wee boy James about the Air Force, the naval pilot, there was two other cases. A wee boy who could remember his mother from a previous life, and they were able to trace that back, and he was murdered as a child. And then there was one who said he lived in Hollywood. He had very clear information, and again, the father, he was very skeptical of this. He didn't take much notice, but because the details were so vivid,
so specific,
we'll look into this. And in the end, they were able to meet. So he I forget the name of the actor. It was from 1920s, 1930s. But they went to Hollywood and they met his children, who are obviously a lot older now. And he was able to go, we did this, we did that, and they were like, yeah. And this was information that was kind of like we'd only be privy to the inner family circle, which I find completely amazing. So it is.
Yeah.
It is with we call it traumas people have. Is it possible to categorize what pains and illness can be caused from past lives, and what is purely a result of what we live, the experience we live in now? Because obviously, if you're alive now, you could experience trauma in this life. Is there a way to kind of categorize the difference between the two?
No, they can be the same. So every physical illness has emotional causes, and those emotional causes come from the three areas: this lifetime, past lifetimes, or our ancestors' lives. And for some of my clients, it's all three of those areas we have to work in. So at the moment, in fact, after we finish recording, I have a client in Oslo this afternoon with breast cancer. So we're working on the emotional causes of her breast cancer. And there have been a lot of stuff. We've worked in quite a lot of past lives. She's had some really unpleasant past lives, working with some emotional traumas from this lifetime and ancestors' life. She's actually Jewish, and quite a lot of her ancestors perished in the Holocaust. So, of course, there's a lot of trauma there that she's inherited into her body. coming out in this way with the breast cancer. So it can be all three, or it can be just one. I had a client, I mean, talking about cancer, and please, I'm not saying for 1 minute that I can cure cancer. That's not what I'm about, because cancer is a complex issue and it needs all sorts of other things looking at, certainly lifestyle and diet and possibly parasites and things. But the emotional causes of illness need to be looked at, because they can be, in some cases, the real roots of the problem. Yeah. I had another client in Oslo a couple of years ago with lip cancer, and she there were 2 past lives causing the lip cancer, and in one of them, she was a young, quite a noble woman who was sort of a bit flirty and a bit flighty in her early teens or mid-teens. And she had a young male servant or a male servant who misread the signals from her, let's say. You know, he didn't realize she was just being a seductive teenage girl. And one day he tried to kiss her, which was utterly against the rules, and she was horrified. She flipped out and pushed him away, and he, then was shocked and was very, very apologetic. But it really shocked her, and she didn't know what to do. And she knew if she told her father that there'd be problems for the servant. So what she did, I think she told her sister, because she wanted to tell somebody, and the sister told the father. And then the father gets hold of the servant and has him executed in front of her. Jeez. So you can see that there's an energy about speaking out. She spoke out and some terrible trauma happened. It's a lip cancer, remember? It's about speaking out. In the second past life, she was an African woman who was raped, and she could never tell anybody about the rape because the man who did it was in her tribe. And if she told people, first of all, nobody would have believed her, they would have believed him. And secondly, she would have had a stigma and nobody would have wanted to marry her. So she had to button her lip. So in this case, the lip was closed. So that's what the energy was about the lip cancer. Yeah. So we cleared both the past lives, released the traumas. She made quite a lot of lifestyle changes. She also had some kinesiology, which is a wonderful complementary therapy. About 5 months later, she sent me a message saying, "Steve, I've been to the hospital. They cannot find a trace of cancer in my body." Yeah. So, emotional causes for any illness is extremely significant. Yeah. And, if we don't work on them, often the illness will come back or it won't fully go away. So I've had people in past lives who have asthma in this life died in the trenches of gas in the First World War. And of course, there's the gas in the lungs. So, every illness has emotional causes in my world. And for me, working on that is fundamentally important instead of just rushing off to the doctors. Yes, see the doctor, but work on the real roots.
Yeah, because there's that powerful story. There's a book, Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor Frankl, and he was a psychologist, but he was put in Auschwitz because he was Jewish, and he talked about, and again, this is a kind of demonstration of how powerful the mind is. He says near the end of the war, there was a lot of rumors about when they were going to get liberated, and some of the people go, "Oh, we're going to get liberated on the 17th. The Russians will be here by the 17th of December or whatever." And when that day came and went, and there was no sign of being liberated, he says these people were just literally, if you seen them smoking their cigarette, that was them pretty much then they're giving up, because you always held on to your cigarettes. And he says almost these people just lie and just die. It's almost like they were holding on, and when they realized, "Oh, I'm not getting liberated today," it was like they mentally just gave up, and it's almost like the conditions of their body would be in really bad shape, malnourished, disease, all that. But it was like the mind kind of holding on. "Oh, I can't hold on," and just kind of let go, and they would just die. And even gave accounts that even with beatings, like the SS would go in and go, why is he not up out of his cot? And the beat, it's just, there's no fear. They had to just given up. So it's really, I think it's a powerful testament to how powerful the mind is. And there's even examples of women. There's a son that was working in America, and he was doing some mechanical work on his car, and he had the car on a jack, and he's able to get up into the wheel well, and the jack came loose, and the car pinned him on the tire, and he was losing his ability to breathe. And the mother came in, and this was on the documentary, on our documentary, sorry, and she was literally able to lift up the limb of the car, and until help came and get him out, and that saved his life. There's a great thing you mentioned in the book. And with one of your clients, she suffered severe back pain, which was linked to your past life. Can you tell us a bit more about that? And once you regressed the back, the story of obviously what happened and what happened after that.
Yeah, that was quite a remarkable case, because that lady was in her mid-30s, and she'd had back pain for quite a long time, and it was a mystery back pain. She was in pain all the time. She got to the stage where she couldn't go to the gym anymore because she was in so much pain. She was putting weight on because she couldn't train. She was depressed because she put weight on and the pain. She even had surgery, and in the hospital, the surgeons opened her up, couldn't find anything wrong with the back, so they just stitched her back up again and sent her home with painkillers. And, again, she came to me, she was in a desperate state. She came to me because she was recommended by a friend of hers who had already been some years earlier to see me, who was an alcoholic. And this lady, now this was quite miraculous. Maybe every 10 years we get this. This lady had been a functioning alcoholic for 16 years. Every day she was at work. Every night she got home, she started drinking. She was paralytic every night. She was overweight, felt dreadful in herself, was ill most of the time. And I guided her in just one, and she came to me to prove that I couldn't help her. She came to me, this lady was alcoholic. She was forced to see me by a friend. And she was saying to her, this Burgess bloke can't help me at all. He's dying bloody hypnotherapy. That's not going to help me. Rubbish, no. And so I guided her into hypnosis, and she went into past lives. And after one session of past life regression, she never drank any alcohol again. She's never drunk since. This is 24 years ago, 25 years ago. So she was really shocked. Because of that success, she told her friend with a back pain. Now, the friend with the back pain was a left brain person. She's a magistrate. She wasn't somebody who suffers fools gladly. She was no sort of weirdo, new agey, woo-woo person. But I guided her into trance, and her subconscious indicated that there were 4 past lives causing the back pain. And the first past life was the big one. It was the most significant one. And she regressed back into the Second World War as a young male Nazi officer, a very naive, scared young Nazi officer who, because of his artistic tendencies, became part of the Nazi war team that was going around Europe robbing art treasures from the captured cities and shipping them back to Berlin. Now, that was okay. That was a cushy number for him. Unfortunately, then things start to go wrong for the Nazis, and he gets shipped off to the Eastern Front. And the next thing, he's fighting in Russia in the winter. And he's terrified. He's absolutely terrified. And he said, and this is interesting because this lady, again, bear in mind, she's in trance. She's laying there in the chair. She's got her eyelids closed. This information just coming into her head from nowhere. And she said something like, it's April 1942. I can't remember the dates exactly. She said, we're bogged down in the snow. The supply lines can't get through. We're just stuck in the snow. We're about, I think she said, 40 miles from Moscow and a little town called Smolensk or Shlonsk. And after the session, I looked it up, and there on the atlas, there's this little town called Smolensk, about 40 miles from Moscow, and they were bogged down in the snow at that date, as she said. And the supplies couldn't get through. The trucks are stuck in the snow. There's skirmishes going on. And she took part in a really unpleasant skirmish, and it was, or he took part. It was, and while she experienced that, she was very upset because she had to kill a young Russian boy, in a building. They went and smoked them out, as it were. Then what happened is this young man was told about an icon, a Russian religious piece of art, which was in a church behind the German lines in a village about a mile away, which they'd captured some time earlier. This young man then made the biggest mistake of his life because he thought, well, it'd be safe, it's behind our lines. So he jumps on a motorbike, and without an armed escort, he travels to this village. Now, what happened then, and again, this was a big reaction, and I'll underplay it because it'll, if I were to overplay it or do it as she did it, it will break your speakers and your microphones. So I said, what's happening? So she's laid in trance. She said, I've arrived at the village. I've got off the motorbike, and I've found the church. And she said, it's deserted. There's nobody here in this village. Wooden buildings around, nobody around. And she said, I've found the church. I'm walking to the church through the churchyard to find the entrance. And suddenly she screamed and she jumped about 3 feet in the air and crashed down onto the chair and started to choke and splutter. So, I mean, I was shocked. I said, what's happened? She said, I've been shot. I've been shot. And then she took about 20 minutes to die. And when she died, then she passed through into spirit and she was very calm. Now, again, I took her back through the death several times. And the first time she went back through it again, as the bullet went in, she screamed and jumped up in the air and landed with a crash. The fourth time, though, that we went back through it, when the bullet went in, she just went, coughed, and she was dead. Guess where the bullet went, Jonathan?
Lower back.
Lower back, exactly the place where the pain was.
Yeah.
So we fully released that. She came out of trance. I mean, she was very shocked by this. This is, because people often say to me, oh, well, all the people you come to, you believe in past lives, they're all new agey people. No, they're not. The people who just want help, who are stuck with an issue and a problem that's stopping them from living their lives freely. And as we said earlier, sometimes are desperate for help. They have no belief in these past life stuff, and she certainly didn't. But the back pain, as a result of that session, we cleared the other 3 past lives up pretty quickly. Was completely dissolved away, completely cured. It just went away like it had never existed before, and she got her life back.
Excellent. Is it when people are obviously carrying these traumas through and into their lives now? Is it just the reason why they're having problems? Is it just something that it's whatever the mechanic says of what's happening? Is it just is it almost in a way? Obviously, that would sound, I would come across as a very sudden death, unexpected. You've been shot from behind and taken you by surprise. That individual probably had plans. Once the war's over, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Is it a kind of a grief in a way of a loss of that particular life, that they have to kind of go back and almost kind of they need to go back to accept that loss? Would that be right? Or
sometimes it is. Yeah, there can be all reasons. That's a good one. Sometimes that's there. It's about, what a waste of a life. I mean, I just haven't lived my life. I've had a client recently with all of her past lives. The life she's died young, and there's been like a waste of a life. Not fulfilling her true potential. So sometimes there is about letting go of that grief. I would say about 60%, maybe more, of past life regression therapy is death trauma, is releasing traumas of deaths. And so usually the death is a traumatic death. It's fast, it's rapid. It doesn't have to be fast. It's just very unpleasant. Or they're being torn away from family and they're sad about losing the family. But then again, there are the other past lives which maybe are not about death. It's about traumas generally. Let's say losing a loved one, or a wife having an affair with another man, or a husband having an affair with another woman, and being distraught as a result of that. I had a gentleman who came and who, when he sat in front of me, he was actually the boyfriend of the client I mentioned a few minutes ago with the alcohol problem. And he was an alcoholic. He was a high-level barrister down in London, a top-level barrister in the London law courts, who was a functioning alcoholic again. And he sat in front of me and he said, okay, well, obviously you helped my girlfriend, you've helped to cure her alcoholism. But he said, don't even talk to me about past lives, Burgess, because it's all nonsense. I don't believe in any of it. I'm a Roman Catholic. I was brought up a Roman Catholic. So don't even go there, Burgess. I said, that's not a problem. But we go where your subconscious wants us to go, because your subconscious knows best. I don't. In the session, he went into trance and his subconscious took him into a past lifetime. And this is a past life in the French Revolution, where he was a French aristocrat who fell in love with a beautiful aristocratic lady. As a result of the revolution, she fled abroad and he never saw her again. They both survived the revolution, but he never saw her again. And all of that emotional heartache and pain had stayed with him, and he brought it into this lifetime. And so what he was doing in this life, he was drinking in order to anesthetize that emotional pain that was in his subconscious. He didn't even know was there. So it isn't always about deaths. It can be about the loss of a loved one or something like that happening. Or it can be, let's say, in relationship problems. Sometimes, and going back to what you were asking right at the start of this interview, was that when a person gets an understanding of something, that is often the therapy. So sometimes my client will come with an issue, let's say, with the mother. And after the sessions, they'll say, well, there's no wonder my mother has a problem with me, because in the past life, I killed her. Right. So, of course, she's brought that anger towards me into this lifetime. And that's why she's always been difficult for me. Yeah. So when that understanding comes through, then the healing starts to take place inside the person.
Do you see, obviously, in with people who obviously with like the woman with the lower back pain, that obviously went away. But do you see, once people went through that therapy and coming to the other end, if they keep in touch, whatever, do you see like big change in their life? Do they make like changes to how they live? They get more out of their life, or
not very often, yeah. One of the phrases I have is that therapy sets you free. Okay. And the nice thing is we live in an intelligent world nowadays where people understand that we all have emotional baggage. And in fact, I mean, the father of inner child therapy, and inner child therapy is a wonderful form of therapy about working with our childhood woundedness. But the father of inner child therapy, a chap called John Bradshaw, he says that only 4% of people are truly functional, which means that 96% of us are screwed up in some way. And, it means we've all got baggage. I mean, I've yet to meet any of the 4%, to be honest. So we've all got baggage. And, why carry it with you when it can be healed? Now, there are so many different styles of therapy, and there are some magnificent therapies out there that can help anybody to heal from their emotional stuff. Because all the time, what we're doing as human beings, Jonathan, we are reacting to our inner emotional pain. So whenever we get scared, we are reacting to inner emotional pain. Whenever we get angry, sad, guilty, anxious, whatever, something inside us is being triggered. And that triggering happens at a subconscious level. If we can work on the roots of that emotional cause and dig out the roots, then we don't get triggered anymore. We become less reactive. And when we are less reactive, we are much freer as human beings than we were before. So therapy sets you free, or good therapy sets you free. And, this therapy, past life regression, doesn't suit everybody. I don't have 100% success rate. I have a high success rate, but I can't cure everybody. But when it works, and it works for a lot of people, a heck of a lot of people, it's incredible, absolutely amazing. And people get their lives back. And they then, as you said, they tend to blossom in other areas. They're just freer. They're just more able to go with the flow. And of course, when the energy inside a person changes, then all the energies change around them. Yeah. And things tend to flow more easily to them. So, what I tend to say is when we become more balanced, the world becomes more balanced. Yeah. We live in an asylum. The world is a lunatic asylum when you see the way everything goes. It's just insane. And, but if we can help people to become more balanced generally, that energy of balance goes out into the collective, into the world, and the world becomes more balanced. Yeah. And what tends to happen is then love becomes more of a person's natural way of being. And that's about loving themselves and loving others. So, good therapy is about freeing people up to live their lives more freely and effectively.
Definitely, because I think, again, I know we've been kind of dialing in on the whole how powerful the mind is, but if you've got negative programming in your head through maybe like things happened to you when you were younger, I think people probably know, but people don't appreciate that's running all the time. And we've all been in situations where we've reacted in a way that kind of thought, why did I do that? Why did I act like that? And like I've done things, and you kind of go, and you realize, oh, that person inadvertently acted in a certain way that was maybe like similar to what someone did to you, and someone's like, that's not going to happen again. So when you overreact, as you say, you're kind of you're on edge, like the person with the anxiety, obviously. Yeah. Him having kids, that connected to that loss of kids in the past, so it's kind of like, where's the next threat coming from? So it's interesting along that. Yeah. What would be the most interesting cases that you've came across, or one that kind of stood out?
Okay. Oh gosh, there are hundreds of them. I mean, I've filled the book with them. I mean, the book is just full of cases, and it's all about, the problems that clients came with and their past life experiences, what they said in the past lives, how they experienced them. But just some just one example was a gentleman who, again, this doesn't happen very often, but when he was in a past life, he was reliving it almost like he was really there. And he was actually a psychologist, interestingly enough, in this life, who was having a problem. He couldn't let go of an old girlfriend who dumped him, and he just couldn't let go of her. He was almost stalking her, after they'd separated. She was just sometimes he'd just call her phone, knowing that he could listen to her answer phone message, a voice. I mean, it was quite remarkable. Yeah. And there were several past lives, and in one of the past lives, he was a Viking warrior. And as he was coming into battle, he jumped off his Viking boat, and they were hacking at people, and he was laid in the chair in trance. And as he was fighting in the battle, reliving it, he was swinging this imaginary sword around him in front of him. And he was swearing and shouting and screaming and hacking at people. And it was really quite remarkable to see. He had a complete battle rage on, and he didn't die. He survived, and so that's quite remarkable when somebody goes into something like that.
Yeah.
One quite special one which was quite unusual, was a young lad who came with migraines, and this was special because we cured his migraines in one session.
I think I wrote down notes. I think it was Simon, was it?
Simon, yeah.
Aye.
And what was happening, he was about 13 years old, and every 3 weeks he was getting migraines, and he was missing days off school every time, and it was ruining his school life. Very intelligent kid. And his mother brought him to me, and she sat in on the session. She sat behind me and watched the session. Now, bear in mind again, this is a 13-year-old schoolboy. He wasn't brought up in a new age family. He has no conception of past lives and reincarnation. But once I took him into trance, now my experience with migraines is that they are usually caused, not always, but usually caused by deaths in past lives where there have been blows to the head.
Okay.
And now I didn't tell him that. I just said, we'll do some work and see if I can help you. Guided him into trance, and his subconscious indicated there were 8 past lives causing the migraines. And this lad was a fast worker. Unlike my previous client who was screaming and yelling and hacking, he went into a past life and then went into the next one and the next one. And so, for example, he went into the first past life, and he was a man in the past life standing in his garden, and his wife was having an affair with his friend, and she wanted to end him. So she comes up behind him with a spade, and she smashes him around the back of the head with a spade. Bang! And he died. And he went into the next past life where he was a young man traveling very fast in a car in a recent past life. And as he's traveling in the car, a lorry comes at the side, a truck smashes into the car, and he smashes his head on the window, on the steering wheel, dead. And he went into the next past life where he was an old man climbing up an old wooden staircase, and it broke and he fell and landed on his head, dead. And he went into the next past life where he was a man in a bar in a fight, and they beat him down to the floor and then started kicking him in the head, and they killed him. His head's gone, dead. And he went into the next past life where he was in a battle, and somebody comes at him with an axe and smashes the axe into his head, dead. And he went into the next past life where he was a young boy at school who kicked the school bully. So the school bully gets hold of him and starts smashing his head against the wall. And his mum then comes to take him to the hospital, and he dies in the car on the way to hospital. And he cleared all 8 past lives in just over an hour. And I always remember at the end of the session when I brought him out of trance, and I turned to look at his mum, and his mum was just sitting looking at me with her mouth wide open and a jaw on the floor. Complete shock. Cured the migraines. I mean, so we worked on the emotional and energetic causes. So that type of thing is quite special, especially when it's a young kid who's then, for the rest of his life is going to be free. But of course, also when I'm working with severe illness and somebody gets better, that's very special as well. So, but, the book is just full of all of these stories because I'm as fascinated as the next person by it. I think it's extraordinary.
What can, obviously, things are fairly changed. I mean, I know in America, and I do apologize if I get the name of the organization, but there is doctors who have been looking into near-death experiences and documenting, and there's some really compelling evidence with that. With the likes of reincarnation, what can we take away from these cases, from some of the compelling cases, and what can we take away from it, and what can we learn from it ultimately?
Okay. I mean, I think there are a few things. First of all, is how important therapy is. We all have baggage. Secondly, that reincarnation is a reality and needs looking at seriously and not just dismissing as some sort of new age belief system or something that the Hindus and Buddhists believe in and therefore we don't. So people need to look at it very seriously. I mean, in America, there was Professor Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia. He went to India and the East, and he researched many, many cases where children were claiming to have had past lives. And he came up with compelling evidence that their information was actually real. So this stuff, if this was put under a scientific microscope, I know it would win out. People would realize that it's very real. So that's one takeaway, that this is significant therapy. I've stood up and put my head above the parapet time after time over the last 28, 29 years, because for me, past life regression needs to be accepted as a credible psychotherapeutic discipline. It is not just some sort of weirdo belief system. It is not that everybody imagined these things, that it needs to be looked at with a lot more credibility. And that's one reason why I've written the book, is to say, look at this. This isn't just some sort of silly belief system. This is deep-seated therapy. This isn't the imagination. And I think ultimately it's going on from that. It's when we heal ourselves of our emotional woundedness, our lives change. And we become freer and we're more able to love, and the whole world then becomes a more kind and compassionate place because we're less reactive, we're less defensive, we're more open to giving ourselves love and giving other people love.
Yeah. So continuing on with that, do you get, because it's kind of, when you really process in your head and you kind of think the weight of it, makes you really think about your actions and stuff like that. Do you ever get people who have done horrific things? Maybe they've regressed back and they've been, not saying like Hitler, but they've just been barbaric. Can you give us an example of that? And how do they process that?
That's a great question. That's a very intelligent question as well. Generally, when we're in regression, we are usually re-experiencing past lives where we have been the victims. In most cases, 95% of regression therapy is releasing victim past lives, but there's a small number where the client goes back into a past life where they have been the aggressor. And what I think we should always remember is that our subconscious, it's almost like our higher self. Maybe it is our higher self. And it protects us. It keeps us safe. So, for example, if I'm working with a child in regression, the child doesn't go into a past life which was horrible and awful and terrible and traumatic, because it would be too traumatic for the child. So what the subconscious does, it takes them into a past life, which is almost like a fantasy. And because it's like a fantasy, it can be quite sweet and nice. But the child gets better. I had a young lad who was about 10 who came to me with a lack of confidence. And he went into a couple of past lives, one of which he was just living on some sort of island, not necessarily a desert island, but an island somewhere on the sand in the sunshine every day. And he was just a young lad playing with shells and seashells and collecting seashells and things. And that got him better. His confidence was boosted massively. You think, well, where's the trauma? The subconscious safeguards a person. So it knew the child couldn't explore the real past life. So it gave him a fantasy past life and he got better. And it's the same with adults. If a person explores an aggressor past life, it means that they are sufficiently able in this life to process and integrate that into their life now. It isn't going to send them off into a psychiatric institute thinking that I've killed all these people. So first of all, if it does happen, it means that that client is sufficiently able to take that information on board, integrate it in the life and move on. But certainly I've had one client, again, in the book I write about, who was a Nazi officer in a concentration camp in the Second World War, who was an absolute brute, who was it was a lady in this life, but she was a male in the past life. And she was just horrific, brutal. The things she was doing or he was doing were disgusting and the most horrific things. And eventually when he died, he actually died by somebody shot him. As he was dying and he went into spirit, he then realized how wrong he'd been. Because once we leave the body and our soul moves off into spirit, we see things from a different perspective. We understand things at a much higher perspective. We're away from the earthly drama and all the ego that exists inside us. Once we die, we're just more pure, you could say. And he then realized how bad he'd been and how wrong he'd been. And, and he was full of guilt and remorse for what he'd done. But part of his healing was done in spirit. So there's this idea that when we move off into spirit, then we go to a place of healing where we're able to look at the life we've lived and understand it in more depth. And we heal and grow as a result of that. So, this whole concept of reincarnation is that there's no wrong, there's no right. It's just a learning for us all. And sometimes if we're hurting somebody else, that's part of their growth as a soul. It's not always about us in the past life. Sometimes we're helping other people to grow.
Yeah, how did that lady? How did she come away feeling okay, or did it kind of shake her up a wee bit, or?
Oh, she was shocked. I mean, she was shocked at the end, but she was fine. I mean, it was just like, well, that's okay. I can't believe that. It was horrible. But, and I think, I can't remember now, but I guess also what would have happened is that she would have had a stronger, not a need, but a stronger energy of wanting to help people and to care for people and to be more compassionate in this lifetime because she knew of what she'd done in the past life.
Yeah, because I think if you as you mentioned, I mean, reincarnation, it's quite a wide subject. You get people, that's going to lead them to the next question. You get people kind of claiming to be famous people, or people go, well, I was Elvis Presley, but I think that's also something that when we're talking about this, people need to kind of realize is that very much there's a possibility you could have been a butcher. You could have went in and butchered the whole town in a really horrible way that would leave you kind of like, go, whoa. So if you, at the same time, if you had people kind of obviously coming in, I know you mentioned there, you wrote a book about people who had lived famous lives. Have you had people coming in claiming that they've lived, or if you had people coming in and it's turned out that they've been connected or were living a famous life?
Yeah, and let me sort of answer that just by saying, for the first 10 years of my career as a therapist, having done thousands of past life sessions, whenever I had nobody who had ever been anywhere near a famous past life. All of my clients were ordinary people like you and I. There were, as you say, butchers and peasants and soldiers and doctors and slaves and whatever. And if I ever heard of anybody claiming to be famous in one of their past lives, my immediate reaction was, that's just their ego. They're just an egotist. They can't be just a normal person like the rest of us. So, for example, Shirley MacLaine, the actress, she claims that she was the reincarnation, or she is the reincarnation of one of Emperor Charlemagne the Great's concubines. So, now, when I read this, I thought, oh, come on, Shirley, come on, just because you're a famous actress, you can't be a normal peasant like the rest of us. So my immediate reaction was, this is just a fantasy. They're making this up. I mean, this is often the accusation about past lives. Everybody claims to have been Henry VIII or Cleopatra. No, they haven't. This is nonsense. But then my world changed because after about 10 years, I had a call from a lady who was a housewife in the middle of England. And she said, something strange has happened. Can you help me? She said, I work in an office. And the other day I was in the office, and there's another man who works with me. And we get on very well. We're good friends, but that's all we are. As he passed a file to me, our hands touched. And immediately, she said, I got like a shock. And into my mind came this image of a lady with sort of reddish, golden, reddy, blondie hair and a long flowing dress. And immediately I felt really uptight and frustrated. And she said, I haven't been able to get that picture out of my mind for the last week. Yeah. She said, I just feel frustrated all the time. So she said, what is it? So I resisted the temptation to say it's probably vodka. And I said, okay, it could be past life. I don't know. Come and see me. So she came for a session. And I took her back in trance to this picture in her mind's eye of this woman, and she started to relive a past life. And she was a beautiful woman, or a woman in an old oak-panelled room, and she was waiting for somebody to arrive, and she was very frustrated because he hadn't arrived yet. And as she was laying in my chair, this is when I used to do sessions in my office, she was strumming her fingers on the chair, on the arms of the chair. She was so frustrated. Where is he? Where is he? And then all of a sudden, this man comes in through the door wearing all these elaborate, ornate, historical clothes. And they fall into each other's arms and start hugging and kissing. So I'm thinking, okay, well, it's a pretty standard thing, this, you know, the man in the office is the man from the past life. So I said, okay, well, let's move a little bit further on in that life and go to another scene in that lifetime. And then she went to a scene where she was in a hall with hundreds of people looking up at her. And she was up on a raised sort of dais or a small sort of stage, sitting on a big chair like a throne. And a man came over to her and did a sort of a bow and said, Your Majesty. Now, immediately my ears pricked up. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So we started to investigate a little bit deeper. And she appears to have been the reincarnation of Queen Elizabeth I of England. Now, okay, we finished the session, and I'm very skeptical. I'm no mug. I don't take things at face value. I thought, oh, I'm not sure about this. And she was skeptical. She'd always been fascinated with Elizabeth, she told me. She'd never read books about her or researched her, but she'd always been fascinated. So we started to do quite a few sessions then to investigate this past life in more depth. And what happened is she created a beautiful love story between Queen Elizabeth and Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. He was the man who came into the room. Now, this is historically known. It's factually known that they were in love, and very much in love. But because she was royal and he was just a nobleman, they couldn't really marry. In fact, when he asked her to marry him, she more or less finished the relationship. But in our therapy session, she put flesh on the blood of these historical occasions. They were madly in love. They were passionately in love. And she also paid to the lie that Elizabeth in England, we call her the Virgin Queen, because it said she never married and she just was the queen. She married her country. No, she didn't, because in one of our sessions, she actually experienced having sex with Robert Dudley. Okay. And the extraordinary thing was, it was such a passionate, she was so in trance that as she was having sex with him, in front of the chair in front of me, she actually orgasmed. She experienced a 400-year-old orgasm. It was quite bizarre. So I finished the session, brought her out of trance. We both had a cigarette, and I said, "How was it for you?" Now, okay, and she put these. She just had these wonderful experiences with Robert, but then at the end of her life, she re-experienced, when she found out that Robert Dudley had died, she locked herself in her room, and she was in her room for 2 or 3 days sobbing. And she was sobbing and sobbing in the chair in trance in front of me. And then she took out, she said, I've got his last letter, the last letter he wrote to me. I think it was years earlier. And she said, I fold it up and I write on it his last letter, and I put it in a box. I've got a box with my secret things in. That letter exists. It was found after her death in this box, and it says his last letter on it. So, and it's historically known in the history books, because I did some research after this, that when he died, she locked herself in a room, I think, for days and wouldn't come out. She was just distraught, was Elizabeth.
Amazing. Yeah.
Now, in our final session of regression, she relived something that I thought was not true. And she basically relived as Elizabeth I giving birth to a child. And the child was immediately taken away from her and smuggled out of the palace and left with some courtiers or some people to bring up and look after as their own. And she never saw that boy again. And there was great sadness. Now, when she went through this in the session, I thought, this is not true. We all know that Elizabeth didn't have a child. It's just not factually true. And then I did a bit of checking up online. And there is a story that in the, I think, early 1600s, a young Englishman was washed up or shipwrecked off the shore of Spain. And he was taken into the Spanish court, claiming to be the love child of Elizabeth and Robert Dudley. And he was then granted immunity in the Spanish court. They let him stay there as a nobleman. And I think for the rest of his life, they cared for him.
Right. Yes.
Well, and when I read that, I thought, how does my client know this?
Yeah.
How does she know about this? You know, it was just quite amazing when this came through. So I that was my first book, was called Famous Past Lives, because, do you want me to continue with this? Because I've got another story for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, definitely.
I don't want you to. So a few months later, another lady from Middle England came to me for therapy. And in one of her past lives, she saw herself as a sort of a teenage girl who was looking after the young Princess Elizabeth 400 years earlier. And she had a lot of love for this little girl, Elizabeth. And we felt she may have been Elizabeth's governess in the past. So this was quite interesting. So when she came out of trance, I said to her, I know this is a bit weird, but you may not believe this, but a few months ago, I have a lady coming to me who appears to have been Queen Elizabeth, who you were looking after in the past life as the governess. How would you feel about meeting up? And she said, oh, that's fantastic. Yes. So I said, well, you know, I'll obviously have to break confidentiality here. Would you be okay with that? She said, yes. So I contacted Queen Elizabeth, explained, and she said, oh, yes, definitely. So I got them to meet, and we met in Lincoln. I had a colleague who had an office, a therapist, so I borrowed his office one evening. What I expected to happen was when they saw each other, when I introduced them to each other, Jonathan, I expected them to run into each other's arms, sobbing, you know, I haven't seen you for 400 years.
Yeah.
It didn't happen. As I introduced them, they came towards each other as if they were going to hug. And then they recoiled back away from each other and merely shook hands and then stood apart.
Right.
And I thought, that's weird. I really wasn't expecting that. So we had a chat about things, and then I regressed them both together. So I guided them both into trance, hoping that we could maybe provoke some memories between them. And nothing really happened. It was a bit of a sticky session. You know, there was nothing really came through for either of them. It was a really weird energy.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we finished the session, we bid goodnight, and they went their separate ways. And I couldn't understand why this had happened. It didn't make sense. The next day, I had an email from the governess, and she said, Steve, she said, I've been up all night. I haven't been able to sleep. She said, the door has been open in my mind into that past life. She said, all of these memories have been flooding through. She said, I wasn't Queen Elizabeth's governess. I was her elder sister, Queen Mary, who we know as Bloody Mary.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, oh, come on, I don't believe this. So then we started to do more sessions. And the specific information she came out with, as I said, I had to go ferreting in history books, and there it was. And she's never studied this period of history. And of course, this all made sense because when Elizabeth was a young child, Princess Mary loved her immensely and looked after her and cared for her. So when she was a teenager, when Mary was a teenager, she cared for the young Elizabeth. But then as they grew older, they were separated by Henry VIII, the father, and they've ultimately hated each other with a passion because Mary was a Catholic, Elizabeth was a Protestant. And Mary even had Elizabeth imprisoned in the Tower of London, and Elizabeth was in fear of her life for some time. She thought she was going to be executed. And they hated each other. And of course, that's exactly the energy that they brought into that meeting. After 400 years, it was like, wow. So it's quite extraordinary, when the information comes through like that. And then I've had other people, again, I wrote about this in the first book, Famous Past Lives, who appear to have been very famous. Yeah. One gentleman was Titus Oates on the Scott of the Antarctic expedition. Right. And he came up again with specific detailed information. He'd never researched Oates's life. I had a lady who was a prostitute victim of Jack the Ripper, right, Victorian London. And curiously enough, she's a policewoman in this lifetime. Right. Curious.
Yeah. I know we call it like some famous people who said they were reincarnated. One of the most notable ones I remember is General George Patton. He talked quite a lot. I know he was quite egotistical and stuff like that, but he I think it was one it actually added in the movie Patton, but there was that scene where he's in the Jeep and he takes I need to go up this way, and the Jeep drives up and he says to the staff in the car, I've been here before, and they're like, what? And like, no, I've been here before. I took place in a battle and stuff like that. So remember, I know George Patton talked quite openly about reincarnation. This is way back in the early 40s during the Second World War. So he was quite. It was a topic he was quite open about, and he seemed to have clear memories of what he was involved in, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. And some children do. I mean, some children talk. It was mentioned earlier. I mean, my youngest son, when he was, I think about 2 or 3 or 3 or 4, he said to his mum, before I came here, you were not my mummy. I had a different mummy then. Right. And children often do this. And unfortunately, what happens is I think as children get to be about 5 or 6, these memories tend to dissolve away. They lose them because they become more conscious. But sometimes they're laughed at, and so they get embarrassed about these things, so they don't talk about it anymore, and they suppress the memories. Yeah. So I often say to people, if your child is saying something like that, ask them about it. Let's open it out, get some information, because the chances are it's a past life.
Yeah, no, it's a very fascinating subject, and I think it's I think we're in a time now where there's more. I think we're starting to understand this more. It's been in a really good way. It's a topic that's been talked about more, and there's documentaries on about it as well, which is really good, and they approach it in a very kind of like a detective way. They're kind of going like, this person came in this, and as you say, like what you've done, they went through the history books and took a deep dive into it, and they've connected the dots, which is amazing. I know we're unfortunately running to the end of our time here. just last two questions really. I mean, I asked quite a lot of my guests this question. What's your mission statement? If you have one.
Okay. I mean, in the context of what we're talking about, it's basically, we all have emotional baggage. Have it worked on, release it, do some work to heal yourself. Because otherwise you're just going to take it into the next life with you. And you're also going to inhibit the quality of your life now. You're not living freely. So I'm a passionate advocate for having therapy. I have therapy, work on my stuff, because I believe I want to be as free as I possibly can. And regression therapies help me enormously in my own personal sort of quest to be free. Yeah. So I think that would be my takeaway really for people is, find a good therapist and work with them and work on yourself.
Excellent. And Steve, what's next for yourself? Is there any you're working on? I know you've got the book, the title, the power of Past Life Regression. I know it's out now. Yeah. You working on any other books or?
Yeah, I've just finished another book called The Adventures of a Hypnotherapist, which is a lot of the sort of more quirky stuff. Is it possible to be more quirky? Yes, it is. So some of the more quirky stuff that I've experienced as a therapist in my career. So alien abduction regression, working with people who appear to have been abducted by aliens. Occasionally having spirit release sessions where people have got spirit attachments. And some of the other sort of more unusual stuff that I've been involved with. So that's, I'm looking for a publisher at the moment. And I'm thinking also about, I've been invited by a publisher to write just a general book on hypnotherapy. One of the problems is I am so busy with clients. I mean, I have clients all around the world. I find it very difficult to have time to do anything nowadays in terms of writing. I would love to produce a radio or a TV documentary series about the history of hypnosis. Because that's always pretty fascinating. It goes back thousands of years. And then, of course, we talk about mesmer. We know heard about mesmerism and stuff like that. There's a long history of hypnosis. I've even just found out recently that Charles Dickens, the author, the writer, was fascinated with hypnosis. He actually played with hypnotherapy. I just found that out, been reading about that. So that's where I'm thinking I'd like to do more writing on that. But my role really is as a therapist. That's what I'm here to do. Yes, I train therapists, I run training courses, but my spiritual path, if you like, and the reason I'm here on earth is to help people to get better, because I honestly believe as people become more balanced, the world becomes more balanced. And it's almost, if I can just have a little bit of helping the world to move on and develop and become less insane, then I've done some good while I've been here.
No, that's great. No, that I think that'd be really interesting. I said that I think, as you say, hypnosis. Unfortunately, my first experience of hypnosis was through the TV, and it was people being clocking around on a stage, acting like chickens. And but then as you kind of get older and you read up different material, you realise, and I've also had hypnosis to help me with the swimming. You realise there's a lot more to it, and it can really help you. As you say, like your father said, you come away going, how does that work? It's truly fascinating. Steve, just to wrap up, if anyone wants to get in touch with you for either therapy or even public speaking or your books or anything like that, how can they get in touch with you, or even your YouTube channel as well?
Yeah, I'd like to share. Obviously, I'll give my website, etc. But my YouTube channel is a free YouTube channel with free hypnotherapy recordings on there. I just want people to experience hypnotherapy. I want people to get better. It's my way of giving back to the world. So the YouTube channel is Hypno for All. That's HYPNO, the number 4 ALL. Hypno for All. My website, my main website is lionheart-training.com. Lionheart as in Richard the Lionheart -training.com. And there's all my information on there and how to get in touch with me if people want to book sessions with me. I do have a blog and podcast site, which is hypnoblogpod.wordpress.com, which is a weird title, Hypnoblogpod, because it's hypno, blogs and podcasts, hypnoblogpod.wordpress.com. And my Facebook page is, as the book is, The Power of Past Life Regression. And the book is also an audio book as well. So I recorded it last year. So it's available for those people who love audiobooks as an audio book. And you can hear me explaining and acting out the different experiences that people had in the past life sessions.
Excellent. I'll include the links, and once this episode goes out, I'll include the links in the show notes below, so people can scroll down and access those links. Steve, thank you so much for coming on today. I actually really enjoyed chatting with you, and again, doing this whole podcast, as I said at the start, covered quite a range of subjects. It's fascinating, and it's a great opportunity for me to meet people like yourself who approach this subject quite seriously, and I can ask questions, and it kind of helps further along my understanding as well. And hopefully, if someone's kind of new to this subject, hopefully they got something from this and found some help. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge.
Great. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.